I can't imagine that United are going to be over excited about the potential of another Premier League club taking him, and there'd have to be party to that. There's an argument that suggests they could rip up the contract, which is what he richly deserves. I'm not sure that he's that bothered by that, because that's probably the end game he wants. Welcome to this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan from the 1970s, with a microphone that belongs there. Now, of course, don't forget to keep liking and subscribing. And of course, as I've said before, keep leaving those questions in the comment section below. But let's get on to this week's show with this microphone. Well, I mean, we're only seeing 2 minutes of this interview and a lot's being made of it. And obviously, it is an interview that you wouldn't really want to have seen a player making and talking about the club that he plays for. But obviously, there is a uniqueness about the Ronaldo situation. Do I see him playing in the Premier League? Probably not. There's lots of arguments debating whether Ten Hag has spoken to Ronaldo and reneged on promises, hence the reasons why you've got this confrontation and this level of vitriol being levied back at Ten Hag and the football club. There's other analogies that suggest that maybe United were prepared to release Ronaldo and there were no takers for him, and that might be a salary-based problem. I can't imagine that United are going to be over excited about the potential of another Premier League club taking him, and there'd have to be party to that. There's an argument that suggests they could rip up the contract, which is what he richly deserves. I'm not sure that he's that bothered by that, because that's probably the end game he wants. All in all, I think it's a disappointing scenario. I think the world's best player should perhaps behave a little bit differently. Other people, like Graeme Souness, would have you believe that he's been let down by promises that a manager made that ultimately he's reneged on as some reason why Ronaldo would behave like this and seek an interview with Piers Morgan and espouse the world of his views. Obviously, the fella's been through some very difficult and challenging times. You know, no one can talk about the loss of a child and not talk about it with some degree of emotion and some sort of degree of sympathy for those that are observing on the plight of Cristiano Ronaldo. But I do think as a professional footballer, we have to expect a little bit better, but this is the modern footballer. This is the day and age where footballers are having almost more power than football clubs. So to go to the thrust of the question, no, I don't see him going to another Premier League club, and it'll be interesting to see where he does land, because it's difficult to see how you make these comments, and we're only 2 minutes into a 90-minute interview, so let's see what comes out of the rest of the interview to see if there's any rowing back from it or any qualification behind his observations. But notwithstanding that, it looks as if his time at Man United is done. I always thought it was a marriage made in hell. You've got a fading superstar coming into a football club that was in decline with a lack of leadership, relatively rudderless from the boardroom to the boot room. So it's not surprising to me that you've got this conflict. But all being equal, the best thing to happen is Ronaldo is let go from United and he applies his trade somewhere else, and I very much doubt that's the Premier League. Look, I mean, everyone's entitled to opinion. This argument is raging, and I see a lot of it on some of the alternative broadcasters about influencers giving us their opinions and observing on what the state of a particular football team is, or ownership model, or whatever else an influencer is doing. Look, if they've got a solid, substantial opinion, I have no real issue with it. Sometimes I turn on Sky and listen to some of the people that are on there and wonder what it is that I've learnt, and in fact come away more confused after listening to them, because most of the time they don't know very much. I don't want to be in the camp of other people, and I regularly accuse others of saying, well, just because someone hasn't done it doesn't mean they're not entitled to an opinion. But the opinion itself needs to be a good one. So if we live in an age, and we do, where influence on social media, and it's used as a term of ridicule, YouTubers, people that are YouTubers are used or put forward in a certain way, whereas actually there's huge audiences out there. So it could be said, if Fulham are using influencers at the front of a broadcast to be able to create, or in front of the game that Fulham played, there was influencers being used, then there's a new marketplace being opened. It doesn't. If you don't like it, don't watch it. I'm sort of in the camp that everyone's entitled to an opinion, and if they can stand it up and it can't be debunked, then why shouldn't we listen to it, irrespective of its source? So whilst I'm not in that camp and listening to some of these guys thinking, I've learnt anything from you, I also think, like every seat, there's a backside for it, that for every ear, whoever's opinion that they want to listen to is prevalent. So I don't have a particular sort of pious or condescending attitude towards YouTubers or influencers having an opinion. I just like to think that it's steeped in some substance, and if it isn't, then I don't want to listen to them. Well, I think winning a World Cup in a World Cup year for football, but cricket winning a World Cup has sort of slipped under the radar, which it shouldn't have done, because the performances against India in the T20 semi-finals were outstanding. Ben Stokes has morphed into a very capable young man. He's had some challenges in his personal life off the cricket field, but he's come through now as a leader. I think his performances for England on the whole have been compelling. I think he is one of those players that you'd rather have in your side every day, even if they're not informed, purely and simply because they're capable of raising the expectations of others around them. Where does he sit in the great pantheon of English cricketers, English sportsmen? Well, he sits up there with the Bothams of the world now. He sits up there with the 2005 team, of course the Botham Ashes from 1981. He sits up there with all the great British competitors because he's part of a winning environment. And given we don't win as much as we could and should, giving our sporting prowess, he has to be in and around the top. I like him. I don't like some of the things he did in the past, but that's part of the past. You know, it's like the old Oscar Wilde expression. You know, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And so I look at Ben Stokes as a cricket player and as a sportsman and think, there's a winner, there's a leader. And no surprise to me that he formed part of an unbelievable T20 outcome for England, specifically in the last two games. So he's right up there, but I'm not going to rank him above other people because I think they've all got individual merits. Well, my final thoughts of the tournament is going to be an intriguing tournament in Qatar. You know, it's something we've never seen before in terms of a Winter World Cup. It's something we've not seen in terms of, you know, the ability to take teams and players into World Cups with the argument that they should be fresher, specifically English teams that have sort of suffered from the allegation that their players are tired after an exhausting Premier League season and a European season that ultimately diminishes most of our players. We don't have that argument anymore. I think the background noise, which is important, I guess, to certain people, but I'm going to watch a football tournament. So I'm going to see if Southgate can take the handbrake off and take us one step further forward. I'm going to be interested to a degree to see how Wales do because they're a home nation, although my primary interest will be with England. I think it will be interesting to see how the South Americans feature because ultimately the climate and the continent that they're playing on is more akin to the climates they played in themselves. But primarily, I'm just interested to go to a World Cup to see good football played by the top players in the world in a time when all of them are pretty fresh, and hoping that England do themselves justice. And I'm not entirely sure what justice looks like, but I'd like to see England be brave and put their best foot forward. I don't really want the whole tournament to be about LGBT rights or about the state of the Qatari outlook and their various laws and how their society is held together, because I do believe that football, whilst part of a journey that people can go on, should be just for the purposes of football. And I don't want that to be making me like a limited outlook Luddite, but I think we've got plenty of other spaces and places for people to debate the vagaries of what's wrong in one particular country and what's right in another, and we don't need to do it from a football field. I mean, look, Zlatan Ibrahimović, we saw glimpses of the player that lots of people knew him to be because ultimately he landed at Manchester United, I think in 2018 or 2019, and I think he's a wonderful player. I read things about him, you know, he doesn't need to be told he's a wonderful player because he'll tell you that. And obviously in the time that he was here in the Premier League, we saw a player of a very high calibre. We look back into various relationships he's had over the time with Pep Guardiola and people of that nature where they clearly didn't get on. But there's no doubt this was and is a quality footballer. At this stage in his career, we're coming to the very end now, but notwithstanding that, he's a player that I've enjoyed seeing. He's a player that's graced most of the football clubs that he's played for, from the ones he's played in Spain to the ones he's played in Italy, to the experiences he had in this country with Manchester United at the highest level. So I think you have to have an overarching sense of admiration for him, because he's one of those unique players that provides something very different on the football field. He's one of those people that got you off your seats and lifted you to a place where people extol the virtues of, which is watching really good footballers do something very different to what the average footballer can do. So I think he's been, you know, not so much a revelation, because I can't say that I've watched all of his career. I didn't watch him in certain parts of his time in Spain or in Italy, and I haven't watched very much of him playing in the USA. But I did get to watch him play for Manchester United, and there was one hell of a player there and one hell of a character. And the one thing you don't need to do is toot Zlatan Ibrahimovic's horn, because he'll do it himself. But one of those players that are worth looking back over the pantheon of time saying, he was a bloody good player. Right, that's it for this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. Let me know your thoughts on Ronaldo, YouTubers, social influencers and their involvement in sport, And of course, Ben Stokes. Keep liking and subscribing and keep leaving those questions in the comment section below. And I'll see you next week from Qatar.